This is a Twisted Twin, a Ghetto Guzzi, the bike that I lovingly refer to as the Water Buffalo, or its Christian name, a 1981 Honda CX500 Custom. 15 years ago, I was getting into old motorcycles, and one day I had an uncle show up with this bike on a trailer. He had it tucked in a shed somewhere. He bought it, but he never transferred the title. I think he must have ridden it looking at corn because there was corn stalks and mud packed between the rear wheel and the rear fender. He wanted me to make it run enough that he could sell it and get rid of it, and he was going to pay me to do so. I rebuilt the carbs, threw a battery in it. I replaced the stickers on the side panels, and ultimately bought it myself. I rode it when I was in college, put about 5,000 miles on it, and in the last 10 years or so, I haven't hardly ridden it, barely put 1,000 miles on it. And I decided it was time to give the old girl some love. So I've never tuned it up. I've never adjusted the valves, or I've attempted to synchronize the carbs, but I was never very successful. So I'm going to try and do that again. And I've purchased a Raysan electronic ignition for the bike, as well as a pair of beautiful Mikuni Murray carbs. You see, back when I was in college riding this bike full time, I was always kind of disappointed with its performance. And thinking back, I probably could have adjusted the valves and gotten it to run a little better, synchronized the carbs a little better. I tried, but never had much success. I've become a lot more competent mechanic in the preceding years, but and then also I was not revving it high enough. I was always timid. I was always afraid of blowing it up, so I would never rev it high enough. And finally, I started getting it above 5,000 RPMs, and the bike wakes up above those revs. But at the time, I had read about the mythical Murray carbs, and how much they wake up the bike and how much more fun they make these bikes. So I decided it was time to see for myself. I want to do this a little scientifically. I don't have a dyno. I'm not going to go out and find one. But I do have an app on my phone that can track 0 to 60 times. So we're going to start out. We're going to take the bike out without adjusting anything. Just make it run and go do some 0 to 60s. And then adjust the valves, sync the carbs, and do it again. Then throw the Raysan ignition at it, change the coils and plugs, and then finally install the Murray carbs and modify the exhaust, which means getting rid of the H-box and putting on some straight pipe megaphones and getting rid of the baffled stock megaphones. So let's take it for a rip, see how she does.
All right, number one. How much that one should count, considering I was going down a hill, but we'll keep it just in case. Number 3. Number 4. Number 5. Number 6.
The results are in. A couple things. My turn signal at first wasn't working, and then it started to work again. There's a connection under the seat that sometimes gets loose and will cause that, but it must have fixed itself, so we won't worry too much about that. The second thing is the temp gauge was all over the place. When I got back, I put my infrared heat gun on it, and the rad hoses were showing like 165, which honestly sounds low to me. But in the past, for some reason, this bike would sometime wants to get hot. It was not a very hot day when I did that run, but yeah, I wonder if I have a sticky thermostat. But anyway, all right. So the slowest time 0 to 60 I did was 14.4, and the fastest time 0 to 60 I did was 8.4. And out of the 6 runs, we got an average of 11.3 seconds, 0 to 60, and an average quarter mile time, 20.15, which once I got to 60, I let off, or I shifted up to 5th. I kept it in 4th until I got to 60, and then I shifted up to 5th, so I should have kept on it a little longer to get more accurate quarter mile times. But in any case, Honda's published 0 to 60 time for this bike is 5.7 seconds. A screaming 5.7. A far cry from my 11.3. And, as I'm sure you can see in the video, I'm ripping it, but I'm not trying to kill the bike. I'm honestly kind of afraid the cam chain's going to break. I had that happen to an old 400 years ago. And since this cam chain hasn't been tightened for a long time and the valves aren't adjusted, I really don't want to blow this thing up when we first get started. So, we'll let it cool down, and then we'll adjust the valves and sync the carbs. So here we go. We're back. It's a different day. We'll let the bike cool down, and we're ready to adjust the valves. A funny note in the book, in the tune-up section, the first thing it tells you to do is to retorque the head bolts. I really don't see any need to do that, so I'm not going to do that one. But we'll adjust the valves. First thing you need to do to adjust the valves is remove this fan shroud, because there's a plug under here that you remove, and then you can use a 17mm socket to bar the engine over, because you're going to have to spin the engine to get it in the right position. You can get the plug out with the fan shroud in. You can kind of get a socket on the bolt to bar the engine over, but I tried that, but in my opinion, it's just as easy to remove the shroud. Just put the wheel center with the bike, and the shroud should slide right out. And then there's another plug right here you got to remove. That's where you can see the timing marks. So you need to turn the engine and then remove both spark plugs. And hopefully you have the spark plug remover that came in the original toolkit, because I've not been able to get a different socket in there to remove the spark plug. You might not have to remove the spark plug necessarily, but it will make barring the engine over a lot easier. Alright, so you need to turn the engine until you see either a TL or a TR mark. If you find yourself on the TL mark, that means the left cylinder is at top dead center. And to make sure you're at top dead center, you need to rock the rockers. If both rockers are loose, then you're at the top dead center of the compression stroke on that cylinder, and the valves can be adjusted. Another thing that you can do when the left cylinder is at top dead center of the compression stroke is tension the valve chain, the timing chain. Right here, under the right carburetor, there's a bolt right next to where that inspection plug is to look at the timing marks. With the left cylinder at top dead center on the compression stroke, you loosen that bolt a couple turns, and then you tighten it up, and then the cam chain is tensioned properly. The book says you need to remove the seat and remove the bolt that holds the rear of the tank there and lift the tank up a little bit. Maybe on earlier models or on different models that's necessary, but on my 81, I don't see why that would be necessary. All right, cam chain is tensioned. Time to adjust the valves. I'm not going to tell you how to adjust valves. There is plenty of videos on how to set the adjustment. One tip I will give you, you need a 10 millimeter wrench. Use the box end to loosen the adjusting nut. Don't use the opened end. You'll run the risk of rounding it off. Use the box end. And then for turning the adjustment bolt, I just used a crescent wrench. You just close it as tight as it needs to go. I would say that this crescent wrench is a little small for this, a little large for this operation. If you got a smaller one, it'll probably work a lot better. But I'm sure there's specific tools out there for turning this tiny little square-headed adjusting screw, but you don't need one of those. You need a crescent wrench. Alrighty. So as far as clearances, your intake should be set to 3,000th, and your exhaust should be set to 4. I went through and I saw where the adjustment was at before I adjusted them properly, and most of my exhaust valves were at about 7 thou. One was at 6, and then my intake valves were at 5 thou, 6 thou, 4 thou, and then 5 thou. So the exhaust were pretty far off, but the intake were a little bit closer. I mean, the bike ran fine at these adjustments, so it'd be interesting to see how the 0 to 60 time changes from doing these adjustments. Once we have the valves properly adjusted, we can put the bike all the way back together and go out and get it warm, because to sync the carburetors, you got to get it warm. So I've never been very successful at doing that, so hopefully we can do it better this time. So here we go. It's everybody's favorite time to sync the carburetors. The very first step to syncing the carburetors, I would say, is to have all your tools ready and laid out. So let's go through the steps, and then you can kind of see what tools you need. The first thing you need to do before you sync the carburetors is, of course, adjust the valves. But after that, you have to go for a ride and warm the bike up. Oh no, I need to ride my motorcycle. Whatever will I do? So go for a ride and get it up to operating temp, and then pull it back into your garage or shop or whatever. And then you need to remove the seat, remove the tank, and then I would definitely recommend having an IV bag. That is a auxiliary fuel tank that can feed the carburetors. For some reason, the climber manuals thinks that there'll be enough fuel left in the bowls of the carburetor for you to complete this operation. Maybe if I was a certified Honda tech, I'd be able to do that, but as a hobbyist, fat chance that's going to happen. So I would definitely recommend having an auxiliary fuel supply, which on one of the forums that I read, somebody called it an IV bag, so I thought that was really funny. The way I'm doing it is, I'm fortunate enough to have parents that have a number of old sheds and barns with lots of old junk in it, so I've got lots of old crap to dig through and put stuff together. So I've got an old mini bike fuel tank, some 1/4-inch fuel line, and then in line I've got a valve that can turn on and turn off the flow of fuel. This is actually a T-valve off of a 6.5 turbo diesel Chevy that you would use to drain the water out of the fuel filter, but I'm using it for this now. So you've got the tank off, you've got the seat off, you've got your auxiliary fuel supply. You also need to hook up your sync gauges. Now, I don't remember where I got this gauge set. I've seen this gauge set around a lot, and I'm pretty certain I order them off of eBay, but they've got a lot of funny markings on them, like from 0 to 10 pounds of vacuum. It has late valve timing or leak at intake manifold or heat riser. And it's in that portion that generally this bike will flutter the needles. So if you get gauges like these, ignore them. The other thing you should do if you get gauges, I also learned in this process, is you should calibrate them. Right here inside, you can take this cover off and there's a little screw you can turn. So what you should do is, the way I did it was I've got a little vacuum pump that I got from Harbor Freight. I applied a few pounds of pressure and made sure that the needles all read the same thing. And I could rectify that through the gauge that was on my vacuum pump. If you don't have one of those, as somebody on a forum suggested, you could use the vacuum pump that's in your face, suck on them, and see if they all read the same. So make sure that your gauges are accurate. There's lots of different other vacuum gauges you can use for doing this, but this is the set that I have, and had them for a long time. So get your gauges set up. The way I like to do it is use a bungee cord, strap them up to my Speedo and tack, and then I can look at them while I rev the engine. So let's do that. There we go. The gauges are on. The other thing I'd recommend, if you got a little box fan or any sort of fan, point the fan at the motor, at the radiator specifically. Seeing as this bike is water cooled, you probably won't have as much issues sitting here not running as you would with a air cooled bike. But I don't know. It seems like it's best practice to me to just give her a little wind. Finally, to do the actual adjustment, between the two carburetors, there's a linkage that joins the two throttle butterflies that has a nut and a screw that will use a flathead. You can turn it in and out. That does the actual synchronizing. So you hook up your IV bag, you hook up your gauges. The actual vacuum port that you will use is on the intake boot just before it goes in the engine. There's a screw there you'll remove, and then you'll install the kit that I got came with a little standpipe that goes in there, and you hook up a vacuum line up to the gauge, and off you go. Do that on both sides. Start the bike up, and then you can watch the needles flutter. And at least for me, at idle, the needles flutter a lot, and it's pretty difficult to see what's going on. And so, in order to sync them properly, I found that if I revved the engine up to a certain point, it would even out the needles and it would make them sit at one spot of specific vacuum. One last bit of advice that I would give you, right here, there's this engine mount. There's 3 bolts that hold it. The top 2 use a 12 millimeter to remove. The bottom uses 14, at least in my 81. They might be different for other models. Remove this engine mount. When you get rid of that engine mount, it makes it much easier to thread a flathead screwdriver in right here, and you can turn that adjusting screw. And maybe if you have a friend who can turn the adjusting screw for you while somebody holds the throttle at a constant RPM, you probably could do it a lot easier that way. But for me, I would rev it up, check it, turn it one way, rev it up again, and just do that until it matched or is more or less right. It's a big pain in the butt, so I really hope we see a substantial difference in performance after we do this adjustment. So let's put it back together and see how she does.
Here's number 1. Number 3. Number 5. You still on? Yeah. That one again. Number 6. And number 7. We're going to do one more. Number 8.
All right, I crunched the numbers, and here's what we found. I did 8 pulls. I was definitely more aggressive in this test. Partially I was more willing to push the bike harder, but partially I was just more, confident. I don't know. I should have set a baseline and maybe tried this a little bit before I got super scientific with it, but here we are. So, my slowest run was 11.2 seconds to 60, and my fastest was 6.3. And let's remember that the Honda publicized time was 5.7. So after all of that, we got an average of 9.075, an increase of 17%. So a pretty substantial increase in performance. It's hard to say how much of that was my riding of it or how much of it was actually the tuning up of the bike, but I think it's pretty safe to say that tuning up the bike is absolutely worth it. So, I guess that's what we learned here. Did we learn that? Seems pretty self-evident that if you tune up your bike, it will run better. Pretty straightforward concept there. So what's next? Next, I'm going to install the race and ignition, and unfortunately to do that, I believe we have to pull the carburetors out, which stinks because I'm going to put them back in. I'd rather pull these carbs out one more time and then put the Murray carbs in, but for the sake of science, we're going to put the Raysan in and put these carbs back in and see if we get any improvement there, if anything changes. Really, the reason that I got the Raysan ignition was in one of the questions for ordering the Murray carbs, he asked, do you have Raysan or do you not? And so I decided it was maybe a good time to upgrade my ignition. I don't know that I've read that the Raysan is an improvement over the stock ignition unless you are experiencing a failing ignition system, which I am not. But we'll see. I guess if worse comes to worse, I'll keep the old components and sell them or do something with them because they still work. I almost wonder if maybe the bigger upgrade will be replacing these spark plug boots. In the past, I read that these spark plug boots are notoriously for going bad, so that's why I've got some tape wrapped around them to help insulate them. They're definitely old and cracked and not in very good shape, so hopefully some new boots would do well. The only ones I could find were some eBay ones, but they seem to have pretty decent reviews, so hopefully they do pretty good. That's it for this one. I hope you found this interesting and informative, especially if you're trying to fix up your own CX500. And don't forget to probe straight.